Okay, so thank you, Rob, for doing this. You volunteer with Care for Calais. Who are they? What do they do? And what have they been doing in Greenwich?
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for this opportunity
Yeah.
to talk to you. Care for Calais is a national charity, and as the name suggests, it originally was set up to support asylum seekers, refugees, and so on in northwest France. And then, particularly since COVID, has more started to operate in the UK.
Does the UK take more asylum seekers than other countries?
That's a very interesting question. So the answer, it does take more than some countries, but it is much lower down in the numbers than people often expect.
Mm.
And I think it's worth bearing in mind that something like 85% of the world's refugees live outside Western Europe and outside North America. So the majority of people, when they flee, whether it's war or increasingly climate change at the moment, but war, conflict, violence, they don't want to travel too far.
So we've heard a lot about the government stop the boats policy. Do you think it will make asylum seekers choose different ways of traveling,
I
which
think
seems to be the idea of it, or to make them, or will it make them decide to stay at home? Do you think it will work?
that is a very complex question, and I do think it's probably too early to tell. I think the way I would look at it is probably more. I mean, I think it's really worth saying, first of all, that it is nobody in their right mind would suggest that travelling by boat, big or small, across the English Channel is a wise or sensible thing to do. This is people in very desperate circumstances.
There are lots of crises in the world, as you mentioned before, causing people to migrate. What would you say to someone who said we should concentrate on looking after our own people rather than taking in people from abroad?
I think that's it's a legitimate point for people to make, and I don't want to. I think sometimes it's on the other hand seen as very much one or the other.
Mm.
And I don't think it's personally a trade-off. I think you should very much care for your neighbours and your friends and family. But I think, as I say, a little bit of empathy for other people often in far far more serious circumstances means that you could try and look after both.
Why why does it seem to take so long for people's claims for asylum to be processed? I've heard of people sort of waiting years. Why is that?
I mean, this is subject to some debate. I think on the one hand, it's asylum claims are difficult to process. People
Mhm.
are, and the legislative, the legal framework that's built up over the years is pretty complicated. It's a pretty serious decision that people are then making because it can pretty much mean life or death. Particularly people who returned from the UK to the country that they came from. Um, on the other hand, it is an administrative task which um, much more complex administrative tasks take place every day, and
Yeah.
in the NHS, for example. So uh, it's not obvious why it takes quite so long.
So what are the reasons? I'm sure there are many, many, but what are the reasons people leave their homes in search of a better life in a country like the UK? What do they hope for in coming here, and what can they contribute?
In the top five countries where people who come to the UK from, majority of them in small boats, are countries like Iran, Afghanistan, Iraq, Eritrea, which is in Eastern Africa and is essentially like North Korea or
Yeah.
somewhere in the, you know, um, these are not, people are leaving those countries because of, in most cases, just enormous amounts of violence and
Mm.
disruption and lack of security and safety.
Yeah.
And there are economic differences between the UK and those countries as well. But I would ask people to see that people are much more likely to be fleeing, well, seeking sanctuary in other countries.
Some of the media reporting about refugees isn't very sympathetic. What does that have an impact on them? Have you come across anyone being
Yeah,
impacted by that?
they follow the media, the English language media. They are very they're as soon as one starts to see them as flesh and blood, normal people in extraordinary circumstances, it's quite clear that they know that they are demonized. They know they're unpopular, and they know that people are frightened of them. And this puts enormous pressure on them to always, if you like, be on their best behaviour, because they are very aware that people will often be looking for the worst in them. And the way I try to see it is that it's asking a lot for them. These are people if they've come from war
Yeah.
and they've been traumatized and lost members
Mm.
of their family and so on. It's a lot to expect them to be presentable,
Yeah.
wholesome looking,
Yeah.
clean cut,
Yeah.
and that isn't a standard which we would apply to other people in the UK in vulnerable circumstances.
What leads you, personal question, what leads you to spend your time and energy on this cause?
I've never been a refugee. I've grown up in England, travelled a bit, but I feel at home in the UK. Um, so I often feel
Yeah.
I have very little in common with the people I've met. I think I'm driven by
Yeah.
a sympathy ultimately. I mean,
Mhm.
anybody who's grown up in the UK is very familiar with stories about the Second World War, for example, and conflict. And as soon as you start to put yourself in other people's shoes, it sort of you can bring that into whether it's Somalia or Iraq or any country like that, really, where you can start to imagine, you start to think about how you would want to be, what sort of reception you would wish for,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then that starts to contrast with the absolutely daily onslaught of you know um, negative
Yeah.
imagery and negative words that are said about these people, and I kind of find that difference quite motivating.
What would you say sort of, worries you most about the situation that we're in at the moment in terms of refugees, and what, or from their perspective, and what gives you hope?
There's clearly an ever increasing hostility to refugees, asylum seekers, and so on in the UK. It's been like this for a while, but it does feel that it has got a lot worse in the last couple of years. And so the thing I fear a bit is that we sleepwalk into a situation where very, very violent behaviour could become normal. In terms of things that give me
Okay.
hope, I think we're very UK is a very kind country in many ways, and there is a lot of good in people, and we have historically had often done the right things.
I mean, this interview will be seen by people in our congregations and beyond, and I just wondered, just in summary, what you feel people can do to help,
I think it's
so that it goes, yeah, maybe we draw on the best of our history, and we don't go on this trajectory towards demonizing people. What can we do?
I think there are two sort of tracks to this. I mean, there's the obvious thing, which is to donate money it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be Calais. There's plenty of other really great refugee charities out there. We need to have just talk about it. It's not a difficult issue. It's a complicated issue, but think about it, talk about it, talk
Yeah.
to your and not and be don't be worried if there are things there. Don't have this idea you shouldn't say or think things within reason, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just it's not as polarized. It needn't be as polarized as it
It's
is.
polarized, just yeah,
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 just
yeah,
and I mean it's a schmaltzy way to put it, but try and be kind. Just
yeah,
be. There's no need
yeah.
to be unpleasant to these people.
Thank you so much, Rob. Thank you for your
Thank
time.
you.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
all you do. And
Thank you.
yeah, I'm sure what you've said will really get people thinking. So thank you
Lovely.
for
Thank you
joining
very
us.
much. Bye bye.